Walk into almost any grocery store in North America or Europe on any day of the year, and the produce aisle will look almost identical to how it looked 6 months earlier. Bananas will be there. Apples will be there. Grapes, oranges, and berries will be there too. It's easy to take this for granted, but nature never intended it this way. Fruit is seasonal by design. Trees flower once a year. Vines fruit once a year. And the climates that support different crops are scattered unevenly across the planet. The fact that a shopper in Minneapolis can buy a ripe banana in January, a crisp apple in June, and a bunch of grapes in October is not a quirk of agriculture. It's the output of one of the most quietly sophisticated logistics systems in the modern economy. To understand why some fruits are always in stock and others disappear for months at a time, it helps to look at three of the most common fruits on Earth, the banana, the apple, and the grape, and see how each one solve a completely different problem. Of the major fruits sold in developed countries, bananas have, in some sense, the easiest biological starting point. Banana plants don't go dormant for winter and don't require a cold snap to trigger flowering. As long as a region sits within roughly 20 degrees of the equator and gets consistent warmth and rainfall, banana plants can flower and fruit continuously all year long. That band of the tropics running through Central America, parts of South America, West Africa, and Southeast Asia never really stops producing. So bananas don't have a growing season problem. They have a distance problem. The people who eat the most bananas, North Americans and Europeans, live thousands of miles from where bananas grow well. Solving that gap required building an entire shipping and ripening infrastructure practically from scratch, and companies figured this out more than a century ago. Here's the trick. Bananas are not harvested ripe. They're cut from the plant while still hard, green, and starchy, long before they naturally turn yellow. At that stage, the fruit is sturdy enough to survive a multi-week journey without turning to mush. Growers then load the green bunches into refrigerated shipping containers. Because keeping the fruit cold slows down production of ethylene, the natural plant hormone responsible for ripening. Slower ethylene production means a banana stays green and firm for the entire ocean voyage. Once the ship reaches a port near its final market, the containers are unloaded and trucked to regional distribution warehouses. This is where the real magic happens. Workers roll pallets of still green bananas into sealed ripening rooms and pump in synthetic ethylene gas for a day or two. The fruit responds exactly as it would on the plant. The starches convert to sugar, the peel turns from green to yellow, and the banana becomes what shoppers recognize on the shelf. By controlling exactly when and how much ethylene a batch receives, distributors can time deliveries so that stores always receive bananas at just the right stage of ripeness, whether that store is 2 days or 2 weeks from the port. Because the entire chain, harvest, refrigerated transport, and artificial ripening can be scheduled with precision, and because tropical plantations never actually stop producing, bananas end up being remarkably consistent. That consistency, more than flavor alone, is a huge part of why bananas are the single most consumed fresh fruit in the United States. Apples face the opposite challenge. Unlike bananas, apple trees are seasonal by biological necessity. They need a real winter to trigger dormancy and flowering the following spring, and they produce one harvest a year, typically concentrated in a few weeks in fall. There is no way to grow a second season of apples the way there sort of is with some tropical crops. Once the harvest window closes, that's it until next year. And yet apples are sold 12 months a year, almost entirely grown domestically in countries like the United States, without needing to import from the opposite hemisphere the way many other fruits do. The reason isn't clever sourcing. It's clever storage. The technology that makes this possible is called controlled atmosphere storage. Shortly after harvest, apples are moved into large, sealed rooms where the temperature is dropped to just above freezing and the atmosphere itself is re-engineered. Normal air is about 21% oxygen. Inside these rooms, oxygen is reduced to somewhere around 1 to 3%, while carbon dioxide is carefully regulated as well. Lower oxygen dramatically slows the apple's respiration rate, essentially its metabolism, which in turn dramatically slows the chemical processes that cause ripening, softening, and eventual spoilage. Apples stored this way can remain in near-suspended animation for 6, 8, even 10 months. A batch of apples pulled from a controlled atmosphere room in the following spring can taste almost as fresh as one picked the previous autumn. This is why the label on a bag of apples in supermarket in April might list a harvest date from the previous September or October, and why the fruit inside still looks and tastes fine. The apple industry essentially bought itself an entire extra growing season, using nothing but temperature and gas composition. The storage capability has also reshaped what varieties get planted in the first place. Growers now favor apple varieties specifically bred for their ability to endure long-term storage without losing texture or flavor, traits that matter as much to plant breeders today as sweetness or crunch. Several widely sold modern apple varieties exist largely because university agricultural programs spent over a decade crossbreeding older varieties specifically to produce apples that store exceptionally well alongside tasting good. The logistics constraint didn't just get solved around. It actively shaped what apple you're eating. Grapes present yet another version of the fresh fruit puzzle. A grapevine, once mature, produces one harvest per year during its local growing season, and unlike an apple, a grape does not really keep ripening, or keep well, once it's cut from a vine. There's no equivalent of a controlled atmosphere room that can hold grapes in stasis for 8 months. So, how do grapes end up on shelves in the dead of winter in the Northern Hemisphere? The answer is geography, but geography used in an almost elegant way. The seasons are flipped in the Southern Hemisphere. While it's winter in the United States or Europe, it's summer in Chile, Peru, Argentina, and parts of South Africa. Grape growers in these countries harvest during their own local summer and autumn, which happens to line up with the Northern Hemisphere's winter and early spring, exactly when domestic grape supplies have run out. Chile in particular has built an enormous grape export industry around this timing quirk. Vineyards in its central valleys, fed by mountain runoff, produce table grapes that are picked, cooled, packed, and shipped north by the tens of thousands of tons every year. Because grapes bruise easily and don't tolerate long, unrefrigerated exposure, the entire chain from vine to port to refrigerated cargo ship to distribution center is built around speed and temperature control rather than long-term storage. Grapes typically move from harvest to a cold storage container within days and stay chilled continuously from that point until they reach a store shelf, sometimes thousands of miles and several weeks later. Once the Southern Hemisphere season winds down in the late spring, the supply chain hands off to nearer sources. Mexico's grape-growing regions pick up the gap through early summer, and by the time high summer arrives, domestic growers, overwhelmingly concentrated in California, which accounts for the vast majority of table grapes grown in the U.S., take over entirely. The result is a relay race across 3 or 4 different growing regions on 2 different hemispheres, timed so precisely that most shoppers never noticed the baton being passed. 1 month's grapes came from thousands of miles south of the equator. A few months later, they're grown a few hundred miles from the store that's selling them. Not every fruit has cracked this code, and looking at the failures is just as revealing as looking at the successes. Peaches are the clearest example. Survey Americans about their favorite fruits, and peaches consistently rank near the top, especially in summer. But peach consumption per person is a small fraction of apple consumption, and it's been declining for years. The fruit itself isn't the problem. A perfectly ripe peach is hard to beat. The problem is that peaches don't fit into any of the solutions the other fruits use. A peach can't be picked hard and green the way a banana can, because unlike a banana, a peach doesn't have a reliable secondary ripening process that can be triggered on demand later. It can't sit in a controlled atmosphere warehouse for months the way an apple can, because its soft flesh and thin skin break down and turn mealy well before that kind of long-term cold storage would help. And it doesn't have a convenient opposite hemisphere trading partner supplying it during the off-season the way grapes do, both because peaches are far more fragile in transit and because good peach-growing regions with counter-seasonal timing aren't as readily available at scale. The result is that peaches remain stubbornly seasonal, regionally sourced, and, crucially, inconsistent. A peach bought at the start of a store's peach season might be excellent. A peach bought from the same bin 2 weeks later, after some bruising and mishandling somewhere in transit, might be disappointing. Consumers respond rationally to that inconsistency by simply buying less of the fruit overall, even though they say they love it. Cherries and a handful of other soft, seasonal fruits share a similar fate. Beloved in the abstract, but never fully able to escape a narrow window of reliable availability. None of this shows up on the sticker price. A banana costs a matter of cents, an apple perhaps slightly more, and yet behind each one sits a genuinely global system of refrigerated ships, gas-controlled storage warehouses, cross-hemisphere trade timing, and decades of selective plant breeding, all coordinated so that a shopper never has to think about any of it. It's worth noticing, too, how much this logistics reality shapes what people actually eat and even how they think about food. Apple pie became an American culinary icon in part because apples were reliably available almost everywhere, almost all the time, for generations. Bananas became a lunchbox staple in part because they show up in stores looking essentially the same in July as they do in December. The fruits that dominate diets aren't always the most delicious options available on Earth. They're often the ones whose supply chains happen to be solvable. Next time you're standing in a produce aisle, picking between apples, bananas, and grapes without much thought, it's worth remembering that this convenience is closer to an engineering achievement than an accident of farming. Somewhere behind every one of those fruits is a shipping route, a storage room, or a hemisphere's worth of timing, all quietly doing the work of making a seasonal crop feel like it was never seasonal at all.